Okay, cool. We're live. Just give me a second as I adjust something on one side. This way I'm able to help with YouTube. All right, cool. Without having this weird echo. All right, thank you. So today we're going to be talking about NFP, natural family planning. This is a topic that I thought wasn't going to be as divisive as it seems to be, but it's divisive nonetheless. And I'm going to talk about it. And so, all right. So, credentials. Why the hell should you listen to me? I am married. I've been married for 14 years, and I've been using NFP for over a decade. And there's some complication at the very beginning, but we're going to talk about that at another time. But my wife and I have been using NFP for over a decade. And so it's really important to address this not only from like a theological perspective, which it's not that terribly difficult to explain theologically, which is why I'm okay saying it. I've been living it, which is the other thing, which is it's a witness. It's an explanation as to why I do what I do. And so I'm going to give my justifications, my explanations, my understanding based off a variety of different sources, but primarily I'm going to focus on Humanae Vitae. And the reason why I'm going to focus on Humanae Vitae is because that's, I think, where the most concise explanations are. And I'm going to be addressing the good, the bad, whether that's examples or explanations. I'm going to be addressing a lot of this stuff. So it's going to be a little jumpy and off the wall because I do not have like a ... approach to this. I try to keep my conversations as casual as possible because I want to feel like I'm talking to you as opposed to presenting in front of you like on a stage or something. So that's where I'm. So I don't actually know. I haven't like followed up with it, so I don't actually know that. But it's kind of funny that you brought that up, Zoomer. So we're gonna go over it. So the first thing I'd like to go over is everything you hear. Like you'll hear marriage prep. So we have some really crappy marriage prep. That's the first thing I'm going to mention, because marriage prep is almost feels like it's a last ditch effort. Like, oh, we've got to get to these people before they make their vows, and we have to like instill with them like the theology that's been lacking for like the last 5 to 10 years. That's what it feels like going through marriage prep. And so my wife is I mean, she agrees. Like, I mean, it was really ridiculous. And so if you're not married yet, make sure you get a good priest when you're going through marriage prep to talk to, because the marriage prep that you have to go through the motions with may not be the greatest. That being said, part of marriage prep, what will usually happen, there'll be a course on NFP. And NFP is in a lot of circumstances treated as if like it's another contraception. I don't know how else to say that. It treats it like, oh well, like 98% of people who use NFP like use it effectively, and they don't conceive a child when they don't want to conceive a child, and or something to that effect. And it's listening to that is like really embarrassing, because you know that that's not what NFP is really for, right? Like, it's not to be treated with the understanding that you are going to be using it as a sort of contraception. Like, there are reasons why you would use it, and sometimes why you wouldn't. And in fact, like, there's going to be people on both sides that will say, well, there's grave reasons, and then the other side is, yeah, they should be rare, and most of the time you should use, it should be random. And I say random not as a statistician, but as we don't know when, whatever God's time is good. Like that's what I mean by random, is that you don't know when God will it. You're just participating in the marital embrace, and that's what happens. And so I don't mean it as a simply a probabilistic thing in that sense. However, we have Humanae Vitae to go into, and so I'm going to give you that perspective right now. So I'm going to pop this up. It always looks bigger when I first look at it, and so the first thing I'm going to mention in Humanae Vitae is what I think to be the crux of a lot of people's issue, which is observing the natural law, paragraph 11. The sexual activity in which husband and wife are intimately and chastely united with one another, through which human life is transmitted, is, as the recent council recalled, noble and worthy. It does not, moreover, cease to be legitimate, even when, for reasons independent of their will, it is foreseen to be infertile. For its natural adaptation to the expression and strengthening of the union of husband and wife is not thereby suppressed. The fact is, as experience shows, that new life is not the result of each and every act of sexual intercourse. God has wisely ordered laws of nature and the incidence of fertility in such a way that successive births are already naturally spaced through the inherent operation of these laws. The Church, nevertheless, in urging men in the observance of the precepts of the natural law, which it interprets by its constant doctrine, teaches that each and every marital act must, of necessity, retain its intrinsic relationship to the procreation of human life. And so, now what does that mean? The procreation, without going into a great amount of detail, because I'm not going to read you this document here. I, in fact, wholeheartedly plan to read this whole document as a video so that people can listen to it instead of read it, because there's so many people who say, oh, I'm going to go and listen or read Humanae Vitae, but they never actually do. Humanae Vitae is a great prophetic encyclical that in the 1960s, Pope Paul VI was talking about what we're dealing with today. And so he's talking about here the understanding of marriage and the acts of marriage that are licit and not licit. He talks about union and procreation, and the sexual activity in observing the natural law is in relation to being, how you say it, the sexual act is not frustrated. And because it's not frustrated, for example, during phase 3, that is not breaking any law. It's not sinful. It's the act itself is fine. And I'm emphasizing on the word act because it is an important aspect here. And then I'm going to go to a different, so 16, recourse to infertile periods. If therefore, so I'm skipping this one. I guess I'll just read it because that way we'll get the context of everything. But it's really this middle paragraph here where there's a lot of hang up. And so now, as we noted earlier, number 3, some people today raise the objection against this particular doctrine of the Church concerning the moral laws governing marriage, that human intelligence has both the right and responsibility to control those forces of a rational nature which come within its ambit and to direct them towards ends beneficial to man. Others ask on the same point whether it is not reasonable in so many cases to use artificial birth control, if by doing so the harmony and peace of a family are better served and more suitable conditions are provided for the education of children already born. To this question, we must give a clear reply. The Church is the first to praise and commend the application of human intelligence to an activity in which a rational creature, such as a man, is so closely associated with his creator, but she affirms that this must be done within the limits of the order of reality established by God. So this is also like alluding to you can't frustrate the act itself. To use Thomistic language, to use new law, or I'm sorry, not new natural law. That's not what I'm saying. To use natural law language. If therefore there are well-grounded reasons for spacing births arising from the physical or psychological condition of a husband or wife, or from external circumstances, the church teaches that married people may then take advantage of the natural cycles imminent in the reproductive system and engage in marital intercourse only during those times that are infertile, thus controlling birth in a way that which does not in the least offend the moral principles which we have just explained. Um, so just to answer Uncharted Catholic Man, there's a Humanae Vitae does talk about unity, but it talks about it, so I'm taking this. Does the church define how and when unity occurs? I suggest just reading Humanae Vitae. It's pretty good at explaining both sides, but I'm not trying to focus on the two. I'm not focusing on the two modes within sex of being unitive and procreative. It's with NFP. So with NFP, the biggest criticism is that it's not procreative, that it is a type of contraceptive mentality, that it is a type of several things that are too much like contraceptions that frustrate what's going on. And so what I'm getting at with that recent paragraph, here, let me finish this paragraph before I go on. Sorry. I get derailed with comments. So like just I appreciate your guys' involvement and please do more. But all right, so neither the church nor her doctrine is inconsistent when she considers it lawful for married people to take advantage of the infertile period, but condemns as always unlawful the use of means which directly prevent contraception, even when the reasons given for the later practice may appear to be upright and serious. In reality, these two cases are completely different. In the former, the married couple rightly uses the faculty provided them by nature. In the latter, they obstruct the natural development of the generative process. It cannot be denied that in each case, the married couple, for acceptable reasons, are both perfectly clear in their intention to avoid children and wish to make sure that none will result. But it is equally true that it is exclusively in the former case that husband and wife are ready to abstain from the intercourse during the fertile period, as often as for reasonable motives the birth of another child is not desirable. And when the infertile period occurs, they use their married intimacy to express their mutual love and safeguard their fidelity toward one another. In doing this, they certainly give proof of a true and authentic love. So basically, you're not a true and authentic love in the concept, especially within marriage, because when you give yourself to your spouse, you are effectively renewing your marital vows. You're doing what you promised, right? Like you're giving your full self to your spouse. And you know, there's the beautiful aspect of the teaching on the sacrament of marriage. And so it's really important to understand, well, a lot of these things, because there's a lot of different things going on all at once. And I think a lot of people will nitpick certain aspects and focus on that. So the first thing I'm going to focus on, I guess, because there's a whole lot of it, and I've got like a little list on my phone to go over, is, all right, so we know that based off Humanae Vitae, that natural family planning does not frustrate the sexual act. That is, it doesn't create a barrier. It doesn't create, there's no chemical barrier. There's no physical barrier. There's nothing that's creating an obstruction from the procreative side. Because even in the infertile times of a woman, they're not usually completely like 100% infertile. Okay, like it's people, and there's plenty of people on NFP groups that will tell you that they thought it was phase 3 and they weren't actually in phase 3, or they were in phase 3, and God bless them with a baby anyway. And that's a beautiful thing. That's good, because when you engage in that way, you are in a certain sense having you're giving a preference. Okay, like I am preferring not to have kids, and then you are still open to the possibility of kids. Now, like the document says in the lower half here, or the lower half, that if you absolutely can't have kids, abstain. Like, don't or I'm sorry, it gives the explanation of but it is equally true that it is exclusively in the former case the husband and wife are already to abstain from intercourse during the fertile periods as often as for reasonable motives birth of another child is not desirable. Right. So okay, so that's fertile periods, but you can always abstain. And so that is a good thing. You don't necessarily have to have sex every single opportunity. If you, like it said, psychological, physical, or external circumstances are present. If you are unable to afford, say, for example, a vehicle, say you already have 5 kids, and by having a 6th kid, it would require you to buy a lot of different vehicles, like a lot of different expensive items, such as a new vehicle, like say you need to get a Ford Sprinter van or something like that. That's an extremely expensive purchase, and it's not easy just to walk in and do. And so there are cases where you want to avoid that, but that also gives you, here's the thing, realistically, and how in practice how this works is, how much do you want to actually avoid it? Because there's a question of, if you absolutely want to avoid that circumstance, you abstain, you don't have sex. But if you prefer that not happen, but are open to it, and open to it with a kid, you're able to then have, as Pope Paul VI explains, you're able to still have sex, because again, you're not frustrating the sexual act. And so let's see, one second. Okay, so when you're let's see, I'm just trying to think of, so when the conditions in which, so a lot of people will say, all right, well-grounded reasons for spacing births arising from the well-grounded reasons, and there's another area where it says the grave reasons to do that. What is a grave reason? And so if you go to Catholic Answers, you go to other places, that grave reason is incredibly it's vague, but it's vague on purpose, right? It's someone who makes, we'll just, from a material standpoint first, with external circumstances, someone who makes $200,000 a year versus someone who makes $50,000 a year, you would naturally expect the one who makes $200,000 a year to have more kids than the one, if they live in the same area. So accounting for all the controls and everything, I'm saying that because I'm a statistician, so but accounting for the quality of everything else, but how much money they make, you would expect the guy with $200,000 to have more kids than the guy with 50, because he has the resources to provide for them, right? That's a very logical, natural understanding of what's going on. Having 6 kids in a studio apartment, I don't think that's a prudential thing to do. I know some people are in circumstances where that happens, and in a lot of cases that happens after having those kids. But if you are in a studio apartment and you decide in that studio apartment you're having six, well, you shouldn't have you shouldn't have a number, but having 6 kids, that's a serious problem from a prudential standpoint. And so but all right, so now we're going to go to the physical. Say your wife, again, I'm focusing on the wife because more than likely it's going to be the wife that has a physical incapacity as opposed to the man. But say she can't get pregnant again, or no, I'm not going to go that extreme. Say she is in a situation where she can't have babies as soon as she's able to engage in the marital act. Okay. That there's some spacing that she needs because she physically cannot handle the stress on her body. And there's a few circumstances where that arises. But like that is a very serious condition. And like, as the guy, like, you better be paying attention. Because that is definitely a period where, you want to space that out, and you would be able to still engage in intercourse, but I'll explain some of that. I'll go over that particular point later. The last one is the psychological condition. So say you have 3 kids under 3, okay? And you have a stay-at-home mom that doesn't have much support, okay? There's not a lot of support going on for the family because this is the family that is now coming back into tradition. It's the family that's rejecting the modernity that the rest of the family has accepted. But the societal safety nets that used to be there, which is the grandmother would come in and help with the kids. There'd be other women in the family that would also help with the kids. That's no longer there. And so now you're doing this from scratch, and that couple is doing it from scratch. They have 3 kids under 3. Yeah, like for the like for the woman, not to continuously have like a mental breakdown with a fourth kid, 4 kids under 4, that's incredibly stressful. That's incredibly, like, that is psychologically taxing. And so it is something to be weary of, or not weary of, but concerned about when you're thinking about having kids, because you do need that support system if you're going to have kids within a certain amount of space, because we no longer have, like, even compared to when this was written, we don't have those support systems we used to have. And now we're at a point where this is a lot of us are on our own doing our own thing. Like my wife and I are doing that. And so that's one of the reasons why the well-grounded reasons is so vague, is because it is going to depend on the person. It's going to depend on their circumstance. And it's really not something you should downplay or just say, oh, well, that's weaponized ambiguity. No, it's absolutely not. Like, people come from a lot of different backgrounds. They have a lot of different financial circumstances, psychological circumstances, and physical. Like, genetically, we know that some people are better suited for childbirth than others. Psychologically, we know that, stress on the body, stress of a circumstance, like having 3 babies going off at the same time constantly by yourself, like, things add up. And so this is also kind of like a little like push for when you get older, like, make sure you're there for your daughters, like when you're a grandparent, so that you can give them something you didn't have, which is support when the kids come, and not just like once a week thing, but like a semi-consistent, like, you're coming 3 to 4 days a week and you're helping them. I'm really pushing for that because, like, I think we're naturally going to get back to that because of the way the economy is, but that's a little off topic. So let's see. Small kids are very high needs emotionally, mentally, and physically. Some women can breeze through it. Others find it draining. So, right. So, because, like, we're not all made equal, right? Like, we're all made in equal dignity, but how we, like, where we came from, where we are in life, like, we're not all the same. And so that is really important to explain. Now, the next thing I want to bring up is kind of like this. Let's see if I can, because we don't necessarily need to. We'll go there if someone like brings up a question. Let's see. So again, I do want to emphasize I'm not a theologian, but I am someone who's been practicing NFP for 10 years, for a little bit more than 10 years. So there are times where it kind of sucks, right? Like, you are living just above poverty. You have 3 kids, and like this was us. Like you're living just above poverty. You have 3 kids. Your wife already stays home, and you're having a hard time like taking care of what you have. Okay. The thing that is not emphasized enough in NFP courses is the fact that you really do need to abstain sometimes. Like you need to just stop. NFP is not a golden ticket to just doing whatever you want whenever you want. Like that's just not how. Like it's really weird to be like treated like a contraception when it comes to marriage prep. And like that's the biggest problem a lot of people have with it, is that it is treated like a marriage prep. I'm sorry, it is treated like a contraception when it's talked about in those marriage preps. And so it's let's see, how can I say this? Like there have been times, like there was one time we had to abstain for 2 years. And for some people that is crazy. Okay. But our circumstance, we didn't want to risk doing anything and potentially having a child out of this. And so, you know, like I made sure like I was okay with my wife was okay with saying this, but it's just like, it's not something to be taken lightly. You're talking about something that when you come together, you can create life with God. Like that's not a small thing. And so when you have certain situations, like you do have to abstain. You have to do more than simply just, oh well, um, treat it like a loophole, because like unfortunately there's a lot of people who treat it like a loophole. Um, but like when you ask us, for example, um, what is the age range of your kids? I have one that's about to be 11. I have one that's 8. I have one that's 6. I have one that's about to be 3, and I have a 3-month-old. That is like really good spacing in terms of a lot of people's perspectives. Like they're like, wow, like your spacing's like ideal in some cases. But like that's a combination. So like first thing, that's a combination of both NFP and abstinence. So it is not simply like, and when I say abstinence, I mean like long, like I said, like the 2-year abstinence. Like sometimes you just like you have to wait because you are not financially able, like as the guy, like sole breadwinner of the household. Like I can't justify having another kid and or the possibility of another kid because I'm looking at what I have. Like we don't go on vacations. Like we haven't, like getting a little personal, like we haven't gone on vacations in an exceptionally long time, like as a family. Like when I say vacations, I mean like resorts and or like even just a hotel. Like with 5 kids, that's really hard. That's, you have to at least buy two what is it, 2 rooms. But it's not something we do. And it's not like I make a ridiculous amount of money where I'm able to just be like, yeah, we can just have as many kids as we want. Like we can't. Like that's untenable. Like, do I know people who have a lot of kids, like in the double digits? Absolutely. I just congratulated one of them for being in his position for a long period of time. He makes a lot of money. He makes a lot more money than I do. But there are real circumstances. Like I'm bringing this up because a lot of people will skim over practical real circumstances. And so I'm here attesting to my circumstance and how I've used this. And I'm not trying to suggest this is some sort of abuse, or I'm trying to justify like why I'm doing this. Like I'm using what the church has taught. And like ask anybody who knows me, like I am very much like about making sure that like we follow what we're supposed to follow in terms of the church. Like it's really like, well, all right, whatever. It's, watch my other videos if you want to see how I like my perspective on this. And my wife, it's like, but 100% I'd rather have our kids than vacation. Absolutely. I would rather have our kids than go on vacations. And so it's So we have 5 kids. I'm able to provide for my family, and our house is at a point where it's like, it's not big enough as it is already, and we're making do with what we have. Okay. Like NFP is made for situations like ours, where we have been very generous with our trust, because that's what it is. Um, we are generous with our trust with God, because that's what you should be doing. Like you should be like trusting God. Um, but at the same time, we have, as what the church has taught, and obviously as the magisterium, that there are ways that we can still, uh, let's just say, show up. I've already said it, but show a preference as opposed to being specific. But that being said, this is the other side of that coin. Is besides having a preference not to have kids, you can also do the opposite. You can do the preference to have kids, where you have sex. Sex is sacred, so I just want to emphasize that, because I don't think we say it enough. Sex is sacred. That you have, excuse me, that you sorry, I just saw that this is like thrown me off. Like, it's great. Oh, I'm sorry, I meant to show this. Like, best time to have sex. So it's like thrown me off, like what I was saying. But it's derailed me, I think is what. But it's yeah, it has kind of derailed me. Dang, man. Okay. So yeah, so sex is sacred, but you also, you can have here we go. We have a preference for having I really gotta think. No, you're fine. You're fine. You're fine. You're fine. I really gotta have a co-host or something, because to keep me on track, or to keep us on track, because I'm it's hard to do both the comments in this. So but you have you can get a preference for having kids, because God has set up your wife's cycle to, you can read it, you can understand it, and you can play into that, right? Like, it's not that you're taking the place of God, because ultimately God is the one that creates the life, right? Like, you come together, God creates life. Okay. But it doesn't always happen, as Pope Paul VI stated in I'm not going to show it, but in the 11th paragraph, that it doesn't always result in a child. And so when you understand the cycle, you understand when she's fertile. Okay, so like, you're showing a preference to God. And so I think it's the reason why I bring up preference is because you're not saying no. You're not saying yes definitively, because you can't, right? Like, you can't say yes definitively to God outside of simply having the marital embrace, because you're not God. God is the one that gifts you the child. The same thing when you embrace during the low fertility periods. You don't, you're not saying no, because you can't say no in that way. But you're leaving it open for God to gift you with a child, if so being. Now, obviously, as the document has stated, and there and elsewhere, contraception is wrong. Like, physical and chemical barrier is wrong, but everyone seems to focus on the contraceptive understanding. And when I say contraceptive, I mean they usually look at contraceptive to mean, well, they're avoiding pregnancy. Okay. And so that's what I'm emphasizing here. But there's also the other side, which is you can actually encourage pregnancy, because when your wife is fertile. That being said, so, okay, this is like something that is never talked about, or at least, like, okay, so I've only been into one marriage prep, so maybe it's not, but from other people, I've heard it. No one talks about this. So when you're using NFP, okay, you're having sex at the times that your wife probably doesn't want to engage. And so that can be something of a hurdle for certain couples. And so I'm merely pointing this out because like that makes sense, right? Like during the fertile periods, the wife lets out pheromones to, you know, let the guy know, like, even if you don't even know all this stuff, but like just, this is how it happens. Like there are chemicals that are released, and the chemicals are released, and there's a bonding. There's an incense to engage in the marital act, and then you know, that's during the fertile periods, but that doesn't typically happen during the infertile periods. And so there's that's just the reality. Okay, I'm just pointing that out, like that's a thing. Like so um uh NFP should be taught in school to teach girls how to understand their cycle and emotions. 100%. And that's why, like, when our daughters specifically start going through puberty, that is something they're going to learn because, for example, my wife, she ended up finding out she had PCOS from it. And so that is a very common disorder. But the doctors didn't quite know what was going about what was happening with her. And so she started cycling, and then they were able to find it. All right. So the other thing is when it comes to, so I know this is like kind of going all over the place in between, like the teachings as well as the personal experience. But the next one I want to go over is the understanding of moral theology. So with moral theology, you have what's called the you have like the formula for the moral theology. Wow, I'm just screwing that all up right now. But it's, you have the act, you have the situation, and then you have the intent. Okay. So when you're having sex in marriage, okay, what do you have? You have the situation is you're having sex in marriage. Okay. The act is sex. Now, what's your intent? So that intent is like really important here, because I think this is, if you had to argue, like this seems to be the biggest hang up for a lot of people. The intent can make a great thing that you're doing a bad thing. Now, say for example, I'll take a non-sexual example. Say your friend needs help, okay, financial help, and you give him money. So that's a good thing, right? Like you're giving him money, but you're giving him money with the intent to show him that you're better, like you're better than him. You totally screw up that whole dynamic. Like you're doing a great thing. Like you're, like, from a situation and act perspective, you're saying situationally, okay, well, he needs the financial help. You are giving him the financial help, but your intent is screwing it all up. And so it's the same thing here. If you're looking at sex in NFP as some sort of silver bullet, that it's like you're never going to have a kid as long as you follow it, that could be potentially sinful, because you're treating sex in a way, like the mental state in which you're creating is in such a way that it is taking a great thing, sex within marriage, and you're twisting it because you're only using it from the standpoint of, well, I want to, like, I think this is a silver bullet not to have kids, and I don't think God will not give us kids in this way. And so it creates this mindset of you're focusing too much on like the bonding, and you're like rejecting, like you are subjectively rejecting the procreative aspect, because again, this is intent. Like the intent is what is perversing the understanding. And so it's not something where I'm like saying like there isn't justification not to have, you know, sex during this time. It's just a matter of you're leaving open the possibility of kids. Like that's what you're doing when you have sex without a chemical or physical barrier. And so statistically speaking, like that's just you can't treat it like a silver bullet. Like there are kids, because they just went through sex ed in public schools, that think that the pill, like regardless of when they take it, so if you know how like the pill works, you have to take it at the same time every day, regardless of when they take it, and as long as like whoever they're having sex with is, or really fornicating, whoever they're fornicating with wears a condom, they're not going to have sex. But they don't realize that there's like error rates within that. There's failure rates within those. And so that barrier, whether physical or chemical, may actually fail. And then God blesses you with a child. And that happens a lot. It's one of the reasons why abortion, so going to that topic, it's one of the reasons why abortion rates go up in contraceptive areas, is because you increase the frequency of that interaction, but then you get more unwanted pregnancies, which result in more abortions. And so yeah, that's just a little thing I thought I'd just hook right in there. So let's see. Yeah, so it's like when sex becomes recreational. So like that's the problem. That's the mindset that makes it a problem. And it's so easy in our world, in first world countries, to do that, because there's so many other people who do that anyway with contraception. There's so many other people that do that. And like I said, that understanding seems to be promoted in marriage prep. And that is horrendously bad. Like that is very bad. Okay, let's see. Okay, so here's the other thing. Let's see. I've gone through the subjective intent, so that's the only subjective aspect, because the other two are objective, like the situation and the act. So let me see. Okay, so yeah, it's let's see. So yes, this is when it comes to NFP. So I'm just looking at my phone because my wife and I texted like what we're going to talk about. Is that secular society, like people will notice, like if so say you're there's so many situations I'm going to bring up, people are going to think it's cringe, but they're only cringe because society's making it cringe. So you're at the water cooler in the office and you're talking to other women, and you yourself, you're a woman, and they start talking about birth control, and they're talking about how the IUD sucks, or the pill sucks, and that they're into beta men now instead of into like alpha men, and all these other situations, because there's like actual studies that show like the pill makes women like more feminized men. So I'll probably get a YouTube notification on that, but I will show you those studies if you want me to. But you're here and you're like, hey, like I'm not doing any of that crap. Like, it'd be great if you you followed your cycle and you promoted, like it's like a backdoor way of evangelizing, because what you're doing is you're treating a very real problem for these women. These women are dealing with hormonal problems. They're if they're on the pill, they're in a perpetual state of pregnancy, because that's what the pill does. It puts the woman in a perpetual state of pregnancy, and they're not able to lose as much weight as they would like to, say if they're overweight. And we know that there's an obesity problem in America, right? Like, not easy to avoid, because like you can literally see the problem. But it's but like it also offers like I said, a backdoor way of evangelization. You start talking, well, how about your cycles? Follow your cycles. We do this thing called natural family planning. We promote having sex, or I'm sorry, we have sex during these periods, and it's on a regular basis. There's none of these back side effects. There's none of these side effects that we have from all these different ways that are forcing your perfectly fine system to go against itself. There's none of that. It's just you're following your cycle. So, and so for women, like I can't. Can you imagine like a guy doing that? Like I'd probably be in trouble with HR like the next day. But the women, like there's more of a accessibility from their end, and so the same thing with guys. Like if guys are talking to each other, and the reason why I say that is because like when it comes to sexual acts, when it comes to things like this, guys talking with guys and women talking with women is like going to the bathroom, right? Like it's something where it's like it makes sense when you do it with the same sex. It's kind of weird when you're talking to like someone who's not your wife, like somewhere else, and it's just weird. And it's probably inappropriate um, on a personal level. And so you kind of, you just want to stay away from that stuff. But with the guys, you're able to say, okay, well, like my wife, she's having trouble on the pill. We don't want to have kids, but we still want to have sex. Or, I'm using a condom and it's some, they use whatever way that they're talking about. Like you can bring that up as a possibility. It's not going to be like from their standpoint ideal because they want everything in their cake too. The problem is that world doesn't exist. It's not possible to be on a contraceptive and then at the same time like have all the sex that you want and everything's fine. Someone's body is getting screwed up. Something is happening where there's an issue. And it's not just from a sinful perspective. I'm talking about like functionally there's an issue somewhere. And so and like from the condom's like probably the worst example outside of what Onan did. I don't like actually saying that, so I'm not going to say it. But if you know what Onan did, those are like the two worst ways to prevent pregnancy because they have such a high failure rate. So checking the. Okay, cool. Well, I appreciate you visiting from Australia. I hope you're enjoying the snow. Okay, so I actually, it's really hot here. Like I live in Michigan, so it's really hot. So here's another thing I want to bring up. Because let's see. Okay, here's another thing I want to bring up. So the people who, let's see, if you're on Facebook or if you're in social groups, you will eventually, especially for women, you'll find these NFP groups. And man, oh my gosh, is that a crapshoot? Okay. This will be the last part of what I'm talking about because it's not so much about the teachings themselves, it's about prudence and who you take advice from. Because when you're in these NFP groups, when you are talking to these women, usually, sometimes it's a man, you won't get a lot of this nuance. You will get a lot of, well, this worked for me and this worked for me, and a lot of like anecdotal experience with some really terrible advice. So what do I mean by that? So when it came to a situation where this woman was saying, hey, I would still like to have sex with my husband, but the doctor said that if I get pregnant, I'm going to probably die. And she didn't go into what specific circumstance that was. She didn't go into the likelihood of that. But, oh my gosh, like you just saw all these women go, oh, well, you could still have sex with NFP and it's totally fine. And it's like, whoa, time out. Okay. NFP is fine from a moral perspective. Okay. From a moral perspective, it is fine for a functional, like a healthy functioning couple. Okay. When you're talking about someone that if they get pregnant, they could die, you're now increasing you're now adding another variable involved. Okay. You get pregnant, you're going to die unless you have an abortion. Okay. Well, like that's like, there are circumstances that exist like that. Okay, like some people want to make it out like that's not the case. They're incredibly small. Okay, they're incredibly small. They rarely happen, but they do exist. And for example, I knew someone who had brain surgery, and they had they had a what did they do? They had something close up where the skeleton, the skull. Oh my gosh, the skull to close up, and they were told they could not become pregnant because it would add too much stress on the body, which would then open up that area and potentially her brains could come out. Okay, I'm not making this up. Like this is like like a potential thing that could happen. And imagine telling her, "Oh yeah, like you can risk that having sex. It's completely fine." It's like the dynamic of the situation has now changed. And NFP is not a silver bullet. You need to add prudence, and like there's like serious prudential judgments that you have to bring in. And it's that laxity that is so problematic. Like that is like my biggest criticism with the NFP community is the laxity in which how they suggest sex to just be okay as long as it's NFP because the church said so. And it's like it doesn't work. Like it's not that clear cut. You actually need to use your brain. Like you need to think. Because when you're giving this advice, when you have 100 women giving advice to this woman who says that she would die if she got pregnant, the NFP is okay. It's like, wow, like be quiet. Like you shouldn't be giving her advice. Like this is a very serious problem. Like you're saying, okay, as great as sex is, okay, as great as sex is, there are times when we are called to be abstinent, to follow in the way of Christ in a very direct way. And in this case, of course, I'm talking about celibacy, and how Paul explains the difference between celibacy and married sex life. Like that is like a really important distinction. And sometimes God is really calling you to do that because your circumstance quite literally cannot like it creates a serious problem if you were to get pregnant and you and your kid have to die because you ended up getting pregnant, because you decided to have sex, because someone told you that NFP was okay in that situation. Like that is a very serious problem. And I think there are absolutely limits when it comes to well-grounded reasons for spacing births arising from the physical or psychological condition. There's no spacing births there. It's you have sex, you could potentially die. And so that is a very extreme case, but it's a case that I've seen several times in NFP groups, and it blows my mind, the response, because it is so imprudent. And the people who are responding are not seriously thinking about the welfare of the person who they're giving advice to. And so, are there limits to NFP? Absolutely. The church has set them down. The problem is I think how we have taught NFP is horrible. Like the reason why a lot of secular people or the Orthodox or whoever, like Ortho Bros, like, because this is the reason why I wanted to do this, is because there were Ortho Bros criticizing it and saying it's basically like contraception, which it is not. And the reason, again, like the reason why I think I'm qualified to talk about this is because I've been practicing it for a significant period of time. I have read several Catholic Answers articles about this. I've taken the criticisms, I've looked at the criticisms, I've looked at what the church has taught. I've asked experts. And what I'm trying to do here is give you a witness of how I'm how I'm applying a lot of these things. Because at the end of the day, like a lot of theologians will give kind of like the superficial aspects, and unless they're grilled about it, right? Like, and I when I say grilled, I just mean asked specifically, because like there's some Catholic answers situations like where the caller will ask a very specific question, and the apologist will answer it. And so when it comes to all of the theology about this, like I am not qualified to answer every single thing, and I would direct going to Catholic Answers, which is exactly what I'm doing right now. But in terms of like, what does it mean by well-grounded reasons for spacing births? What does it mean by frustrating the act of sex? What does it mean by, physical, psychological, and external forces on the wife and the husband? I'm giving you my example that I have lived myself. But in order for me to do that, I need to showcase what the church has taught. And so it's not, I feel like I'm just like ranting, and I don't mean to. I'm just basically trying to cover it, because at the end of the day, like I want to make sure that anybody who listens to this isn't being misguided. And I also know that by saying this, ultimately, on the day of judgment, God's going to hold me accountable for saying this. And so I'm being very, like, I guess, lawyerly, like legalistic in that sense, but at the same time, like, I'm giving a witness to what I believe. And that's what we're called to do, right? Like, we're supposed to give a witness to what we believe. And for people who have watched my channel, you know I'm not a theologian. But when it comes to, like, again, witnessing, like, the best way you can witness is to witness and to explain what you do. And like Peter, give reason for your hope. And so that's what I'm doing. And so let's see, chat. Honestly, okay, so I just want to bring this up. Our kids are being brought up in the true sex positive environment too. It's great, natural, and reserved for the sacred bond of matrimony. Okay, so I don't. Besides that, I guess that's it. All right, so for everybody who has watched this, thank you for watching. It doesn't look like there's any more. Excuse me. It doesn't look like there's any more comments, but thank you for joining me. And if you have any questions about what I've said, leave them in the comments section. If you're looking for certain studies, or if you're looking for more theologically grounded explanations than what I gave, I will be happy to provide them for you. But thanks again for joining me tonight, and enjoy the rest of your week.